Hey everyone, and welcome back. We've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today about changes to Canada's super visa program.
Oh, yeah, this is big news, especially for families who are looking to reunite in Canada for longer periods.
Yeah, that's right. The super visa lets parents and grandparents stay in Canada for much longer visits with their family.
Like way longer than a regular visitor visa allows.
Exactly. We're talking up to 10 years?
It's a pretty amazing program, but there have been some hurdles.
Yeah, one of the biggest ones has been that mandatory health insurance.
Oh, yeah, that could be a real sticking point.
You said it had to be from a Canadian provider, which often meant higher costs and less flexibility for families.
But guess what? As of January 28th, 2025, that's changed big time.
Okay, spill the tea. What's the big update?
Canada is now accepting health insurance from foreign providers.
Wow, that's huge. So many families must be so relieved to hear that.
Absolutely. This change is all about choice and accessibility for families.
So does that mean the actual coverage requirements have changed too?
No, not really. The core requirements for the insurance itself are still the same.
Okay, so what exactly has changed then?
It's about where you can get that insurance from. Now families have more options to meet those requirements.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you give us an example of how this might work in practice?
Sure. Let's say your mom is coming to visit from, let's say, Spain for a few years. Before, you'd have to scramble to find a Canadian insurance provider that ticked all the boxes for the super visa.
Right, and that could be a real headache.
Exactly. Now you can explore insurance options from providers in Spain.
So much easier. Of course, there are probably still some rules around which foreign providers are acceptable, right?
You got it. The most important thing is to make sure that the provider is authorized to operate in Canada.
Okay, so how do families figure that out?
They need to check with OSFI. That's the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions.
Got it. So OSFI is the key.
Yep, and it's not just any authorization from OSFI. It has to be specifically under their Canadian business operations, not just some international branch.
Okay, listeners take note. Checking that OSFI list is crucial.
Absolutely. Don't just assume any foreign provider will do. You got to check that list.
Are there any familiar names on the list? Any big international companies that people might recognize?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You'll find some big players like Aetna Alliance, American Income Life, companies like that.
Oh, wow. Those are some major names.
It really shows you how much this change opens things up for families.
So it's not just some small, obscure companies. It's the real deal.
Right, these are established brands, so, it's a legitimate option.
That's great to hear. But you mentioned that the list can change, right?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
always best to double-check the OSFI website for the most up-to-date information.
You don't want to get caught out assuming things are the same as they were a few months ago?
Nope, definitely not. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
Okay, so we've got more choices now, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
But what about the actual coverage? I'm guessing the requirements are still pretty specific.
You bet they are. The core requirements haven't changed. The insurance still needs to be valid for at least 1 year from the date of entry.
Okay, so it's not like you get insurance once and you're good for the full 10 years of the super visa.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
You need to make sure you renew it if it expires while the visa holder is still in Canada.
Gotcha. So it's an ongoing thing.
Exactly, and it has to be paid in full or have a deposit down. A quote isn't enough to meet the requirements.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
So you can't just rely on a promise to pay. You have to actually have the insurance in place.
Right, and of course, it must cover healthcare hospitalization and repatriation. The minimum coverage amount is still $100,000.
So even though the process is becoming more flexible, it's still important to be on top of all those details.
Absolutely, you don't want to slip up on any of the requirements.
And one more important thing to remember, this insurance isn't just a one-time thing.
You mean?
Yeah, it needs to be active every single time the super visa holder enters Canada.
Oh, that's crucial. Even if they're just coming for a short visit within that 10-year period, they need to have that insurance.
Wow, I can see how people might forget about that. It's a really important detail.
Absolutely. You got to be prepared and have that insurance in place every time.
This is all really fascinating, but I'm curious about the why behind this change. Why do you think the Canadian government decided to make this update now?
That's a really good question. I think it aligns with a broader trend we're seeing,
Okay, what's that?
making family reunification easier and more accessible.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Families have been facing some pretty significant financial burdens with the super visa program.
Especially with the cost of Canadian insurance. So this update really seems like a direct response to those concerns.
It's encouraging to see the government listening to those concerns and taking action.
Absolutely. It's a positive step towards making the process smoother and more inclusive.
I bet this is music to the ears of so many families who have struggled with those costs in the past.
I'm sure it is. But, with any change like this, there are always going to be some questions and maybe even some concerns.
Yeah, like what about the potential impact on Canada's healthcare system? Some people might worry that this could lead to a strain on resources.
That's a valid concern, and it's something that policymakers definitely would have considered carefully.
I mean, healthcare is a crucial aspect of any society.
Right, and it's natural for people to be concerned about its sustainability. But remember, super visa applicants still have to undergo a medical exam as part of the application
True.
process.
That's a pretty rigorous screening process.
Exactly. It helps ensure that people coming to Canada for these longer stays are in good health.
So it's not like just anyone can come in regardless of their health condition.
Nope, definitely not. There are measures in place to protect both the individuals coming to Canada and the healthcare system itself.
That's reassuring to hear. So it seems like the government has really tried to anticipate and address those potential risks.
It seems that way. They've taken steps to mitigate those concerns, which is really encouraging.
Okay, so we've talked about the why, but what about the so what? What does this change actually mean for families on the ground?
Well, in a nutshell, it means that reuniting with loved ones in Canada just got a whole lot easier and potentially a whole lot more affordable.
I love that. So that financial barrier that stood in the way for many families is now significantly lower.
Exactly, and that opens up so many possibilities for spending quality time together.
Think about it. Being able to bring your parents or grandparents to Canada for an extended period, that's an incredible gift.
It truly is, and it goes beyond just the immediate family.
What do you mean?
Think about the positive ripple effects this could have on communities across Canada.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
With more grandparents and parents around to help with things like childcare, it could ease the burden on working families.
That's a great point. And it could also lead to stronger community ties and more intergenerational connections.
Exactly. It's fascinating how one policy change can have such a wide-reaching impact.
It's not just about individuals, it's about families and communities.
Absolutely. It touches on so many different aspects of Canadian society.
Okay, this is all very inspiring, but let's circle back to the nitty-gritty for a moment.
Yeah.
For someone listening who's thinking, all right, this sounds great, but how do I actually DO this? Can you walk us through the steps involved?
Sure. First things first, it's important to remember that while the insurance options have expanded, the overall super visa application process is still the same.
Right, so you still need to be the parent or grandparent of a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, and that family member in Canada still needs to meet those income requirements.
Exactly. Those eligibility requirements haven't changed, so you need to check those carefully before you even start thinking about insurance.
Okay, so confirm eligibility, then what?
Then you'll need to gather all the necessary documents, proof of your relationship financial documents from your family member in Canada, and that all-important medical exam.
And that's where the insurance comes in, right? You need to have that policy lined up and ready to go as part of your application.
Absolutely. You need to show proof of that valid one-year health insurance policy when you submit your super visa application.
And don't forget, it has to meet all those requirements we talked about earlier. Minimum coverage essential services covered the whole 9 yards.
Right. No cutting corners on the insurance. It's a crucial part of the application.
So let's say our listeners done their due diligence, gathered all their documents, including the insurance, and submitted their application. What happens next?
Well, then it's the waiting game. Processing times can vary, so it's always a good idea to check the IRCC website for the most up-to-date estimates.
Patience is definitely a virtue when it comes to immigration applications.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
But if everything checks out and the application is approved,
Then that super visa will allow those parents and grandparents to stay in Canada for up to 2 years at a time.
2 whole years. Imagine all the amazing memories that could be made in that time. Trips to the mountains, holiday celebrations, everyday moments shared together.
It's truly heartwarming to think about all the connections that will be strengthened and the experiences that will be shared thanks to this program.
It's really about bringing families closer together and creating those lasting bonds.
I love that. It feels like this change has opened up a world of possibilities. But I'm curious, what about families who might need even more flexibility? Like what if someone has a pre-existing condition and is having trouble finding affordable coverage?
That's a really important question, and it brings us to one of the most exciting potential outcomes of this policy shift. Now that foreign providers are in the mix, we might see a surge in specialized insurance options.
Oh, that's interesting. What kind of specialized options are we talking about?
Well, imagine policies designed specifically for individuals with pre-existing conditions.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Or policies that offer more flexible coverage periods, catering to different lengths of stay.
That would be amazing. It could remove so many barriers that families have faced in the past. It feels like this policy change could really spark a whole new wave of innovation in super visa insurance.
Exactly. It's a really exciting time, and it'll be interesting to see how the insurance landscape evolves in response to this change.
I can't wait to see what creative solutions emerge.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go too far down that road, let's wrap up this part of our deep dive with a quick recap of what we've learned so far.
Sounds good. We've covered a lot of ground.
We started by exploring the big news that Canada is now accepting health insurance from foreign providers for super visa applications.
Right. That's a huge step towards making the process more accessible and potentially more affordable for families.
And we talked about the importance of checking that OSFI list to make sure the foreign provider is authorized to operate in Canada.
Absolutely. That's a non-negotiable step.
We also went over the essential coverage requirements, which haven't changed. It's crucial to make sure that chosen policy meets all those standards.
Definitely no compromises on those requirements.
And we discussed the why behind this change, highlighting the government's commitment to making family reunification more accessible and affordable.
Right. It's about addressing those financial barriers that have kept families apart.
We also touched on the potential positive ripple effects this could have on families and communities across Canada.
It's not just about paperwork and regulations, it's about people and relationships.
Well said. But as with any big change, there are always questions and considerations.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll delve into some of the potential challenges and concerns that have been raised.
And we'll discuss how families can navigate those complexities. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into super visa insurance updates.
We'll be back soon with more insights and practical tips.
Welcome back. It's great to be continuing this conversation. As we delve deeper into these super visa insurance updates, it's important to acknowledge that with any big policy shift, there are bound to be some questions and maybe even some anxieties about the changes.
That's a really good point. I imagine some folks might be wondering if there are any potential downsides or, unintended consequences that come along with these new options. What are some of the concerns that have been raised or that you've come across in the research we've been doing?
One concern that often comes up when you're talking about changes to immigration policies is the potential strain on public resources, particularly healthcare.
Right. People might worry that opening things up to foreign insurance providers could put a burden on Canada's healthcare system.
Yeah, that's understandable. Healthcare is a pretty big deal for any country.
Absolutely. It's crucial. And people naturally want to make sure it's sustainable.
Exactly. It's something that policymakers definitely take very seriously. But it's important to remember that super visa applicants still have to go through a medical exam as part of the application process.
That's true. It's not like they're just waving people through without any checks.
Right. It's a pretty thorough screening process to make sure that people coming to Canada for these extended stays are in good health.
So it's a safeguard to address those concerns about healthcare strain.
Exactly. It helps protect both the people coming to Canada and the healthcare system itself.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like the government has taken steps to anticipate and mitigate some of those potential risks.
Yeah, definitely. They've tried to cover those bases, which is really encouraging.
But what about the practical side of things? I mean, using foreign insurance might seem a bit daunting to some people.
I can see that. Are you thinking about any logistical challenges or things that families need to be aware of when dealing with providers from different countries?
Exactly. What advice would you give to families who are considering going this route?
Well, first and foremost, do your homework.
What do you mean?
Don't just assume that any foreign insurance policy will automatically meet the super visa requirements.
Right. You can't just pick any random policy and hope for the best.
Exactly. Take the time to understand the specifics of the policy. Things like coverage amounts, services covered, and any exclusions or limitations.
So really read the fine print and make sure you understand what you're getting.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Reach out to the insurance provider or even Canadian immigration authorities if you need clarification on anything.
Better be safe than sorry, especially when it comes to something as important as health insurance.
Exactly. It's about being informed and prepared.
But even with the best preparation, things can happen. What happens if a super visa holder needs medical attention while they're in Canada. How does using foreign insurance work in that situation?
That's a good question. In general, the process for accessing healthcare in Canada is the same, regardless of whether your insurance is from a Canadian or foreign provider.
Okay, so there's no difference in how you actually get medical care.
Right. The key is to understand how to make a claim with your foreign insurance provider and what documentation you'll need.
So it's about being familiar with the claims process beforehand.
Exactly. Have that information handy just in case.
Hmm.
It's also a good idea to make sure the super visa holder understands how the Canadian healthcare system works.
So they know what to expect if they need to see a doctor or go to the hospital.
Right. Having that knowledge can make things a lot less stressful if they do need medical attention.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential challenges and practical considerations. But let's zoom out for a minute and talk about the bigger picture.
Hmm.
What are some of the long-term implications of this policy change?
Ooh, you're thinking big picture now. I like it. How do you see this affecting the super visa insurance landscape and family reunification in Canada as a whole?
Exactly.
Well, one potential outcome is increased competition in the super visa insurance market.
Okay, how so?
With foreign providers now in the mix, Canadian insurance companies might need to adjust their pricing or offer more competitive packages.
So it could drive down costs for families overall.
Potentially, yes. More affordable options would definitely make the super visa program accessible to a wider range of families.
That's a fantastic outcome. What other changes do you foresee?
Well, I think we'll see a continued focus on innovation with insurance companies coming up with new products and services tailored specifically to the needs of super visa holders.
I can see that happening.
Yeah.
It makes sense to cater to that specific market.
Right. We might see policies that offer more flexibility, like shorter coverage periods for folks who are only visiting for a few months.
That would be a game changer for people who don't need a full year of coverage.
Exactly. And I think we'll also see a greater emphasis on preventative care and wellness programs.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Tell me more.
Well, insurance companies might start offering benefits that encourage super visa holders to stay active, maintain a healthy lifestyle, and access preventative health screenings.
That's a great idea. It would benefit everyone involved, the individuals themselves, and the healthcare system as a whole.
Exactly. Prevention is key.
Hmm.
And finally, I think we'll see more collaboration between insurance companies, government agencies, and community organizations.
What do you mean by that?
Working together to provide more comprehensive support and resources for super visa holders and their families.
Oh, I see. A more joined-up approach.
Exactly. It's about creating a more welcoming and supportive environment for families who are navigating this process.
That's a really positive development.
Hmm.
It shows a commitment to making family reunification a success.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the value that families bring to Canada and creating a system that supports them.
That's a great point. Okay, so we've talked about the good stuff, the potential benefits,
Hmm.
but let's be realistic. Are there any areas where this policy change might fall short or create new complexities?
That's a really important question to ask. While this change is generally seen as a positive step, there are some potential challenges to consider.
Like what?
Well, one is the potential for confusion or misinformation, especially for families who might not be familiar with the intricacies of insurance policies or the Canadian healthcare system.
I can see that happening. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. It's crucial for families to do their research carefully and get advice from reputable sources.
So don't just rely on hearsay or social media for information.
Exactly. Go to the official sources and make sure you have accurate information.
What other challenges do you see?
Well, another one is ensuring equitable access to these new options.
Meaning?
While having foreign insurance providers expands choices, it's important to make sure that these options are truly accessible to all families, regardless of their location, financial situation, or language abilities.
That's a crucial point. We don't want to create a system that only benefits certain groups of people.
Exactly. It's about creating a level playing field so that everyone has a fair chance to reunite with their loved ones.
And of course, there's still the issue of processing times for super visa applications.
Right. That hasn't changed. This policy update doesn't magically make those processing times disappear.
It's still a waiting game.
It is. But it's important to remember that these applications are being carefully reviewed to ensure they meet all the requirements.
So it's about balancing efficiency with thoroughness.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about potential benefits, potential challenges, broader implications, but what about families who are already in the process of applying for a super visa? How does this change affect them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can they switch to a foreign insurance provider if they've already started their application?
Absolutely. The good news is that Canadian immigration authorities have made it very clear that families who are already in the process of applying can switch to a foreign provider if they want to.
That's great. So they're not stuck with their original choice.
Nope, they have the flexibility to make a change if it makes sense for them.
I bet that's a relief for some families.
Mhm.
Are there any specific steps they need to take to make that switch?
Yes, it's important to contact the visa office where the application was submitted and let them know about the change.
So clear communication is key.
Absolutely. They'll be able to provide guidance on the necessary steps and documentation.
It sounds like being proactive and organized is really important throughout this whole process.
It definitely is. And keep in mind that switching to a foreign insurance provider might affect the processing time of the application.
So it's something to factor in.
Right. It's always best to be prepared for potential delays. But overall, this change gives families more options and more control over their applications.
It's a good thing.
Hmm.
It puts the power back in the hands of the families.
Exactly. It's about empowering families to make informed choices that are right for their situation.
Okay, so we've talked about the practicalities, the benefits, the challenges, but I'd love to get your take on a more personal aspect of this change.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are you thinking?
As someone who's really passionate about family connections, I'm curious about the emotional impact this could have on families. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a beautiful question. I think at its heart, this change is really about bringing families closer together.
It's about removing those barriers that have kept loved ones apart.
Exactly. And creating opportunities for families to share experiences and build deeper connections.
Imagine the joy of grandparents being able to see their grandkids grow up, or the comfort of having aging parents nearby for support.
It's really special. And it's not just about the big milestones either.
Right, it's about the everyday moments, too.
Exactly. Sharing meals, telling stories, simply being present in each other's lives.
Those are the things that truly make a family.
They really are. And I think this policy change recognizes the importance of those connections and makes it easier for families to nurture them.
It's a step towards a more compassionate approach to immigration, one that values family unity and the richness that diverse families bring to Canada.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I couldn't agree more.
Okay, before we get too sentimental, let's wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, from the nitty-gritty details of using foreign insurance to the bigger picture of family reunification in Canada.
We've talked about the benefits, the challenges, and the importance of being informed and prepared.
And most importantly, we've highlighted the human side of this policy change, the emotional impact it can have on families, and the positive ripple effects it can create in communities across Canada.
But as with any complex issue, there's always more to explore and more perspectives to consider.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll be doing in the final part of our deep dive.
We'll delve into some emerging trends in supervisa insurance, look at the ethical considerations surrounding these changes, and discuss what the future might hold for family reunification in Canada. So stay tuned for part 3. Welcome back to our deep dive on supervisa insurance. It's been a fascinating journey exploring all the ins and outs of this policy change, the potential benefits, the challenges, the implications for families and for Canadian society as a whole.
It's been a really great conversation, and we've covered so much ground, but there's still so much more to uncover.
Yeah.
In this final part, I'd love to shift our focus a bit and look at some emerging trends and, maybe even make some predictions about what the future holds for supervisa insurance and family reunification here in Canada.
Sounds intriguing. I'm all ears. What kind of trends are you seeing popping up in response to this policy change?
One trend that's particularly catching my eye is the rise of technology-driven solutions in the insurance world.
Okay, technology and insurance. What's the connection?
Well, we're seeing more and more insurance companies using technology to make things easier and more efficient, like streamlining the application process, making communication with customers smoother, even creating personalized insurance plans.
Personalized insurance plans. That's
Yeah.
interesting. How does that work?
They use data, individual needs and risk profiles to tailor plans more specifically.
Wow, that's pretty high tech. So technology is making insurance more accessible and user-friendly.
Absolutely. And this trend is only going to accelerate as the demand for super VC insurance keeps growing and the market gets more competitive.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What kind of technological advancements do you think we'll see in the future?
Well, we might see online platforms that let families compare different insurance policies side by side, or mobile apps that make it super easy to manage insurance claims.
Okay, those sound really practical. What else?
Maybe even AI-powered chatbots, that can provide instant support and guidance.
Wow. So the future of supervisa insurance is going to be very high-tech and personalized.
It seems that way. And all these advancements could be game changers for families who, might feel overwhelmed by the whole insurance thing or maybe face language barriers.
That's a great point. Technology can be a real equalizer in that sense. But with all this focus on technology, is there a risk that the human touch might get lost?
It's a valid concern and something insurance providers definitely need to be mindful of. While technology can make things more efficient and convenient, we can't forget that insurance is ultimately about people.
It's about protecting people and providing support when they need it most.
Exactly. So human interaction and empathy are still crucial. Even with all the fancy technology, it's important for insurance companies to prioritize good old-fashioned customer service, clear communication, and building strong relationships with their clients.
I couldn't agree more. Technology can enhance the process, but it shouldn't replace the human connection. Okay, well, we've talked about some of the trends you're seeing, but let's get a little crystal ball-y here. What are your predictions for the future of Super Visa insurance? How do you see this whole landscape evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Huh. All right, let's try to predict the future. It's always tough to say for sure, but based on what we're seeing now, I think a few things are pretty likely. First, I think the market for Super Visa insurance is going to keep growing.
Okay, why do you think that?
Well, Canada's population is aging, and more families are looking to reunite across borders. So the demand for the Super Visa program is only going to increase.
And that means more demand for insurance.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What else?
With that increased demand, I think we're going to see even more competition in the market, which is good news for families.
So,
More competition could lead to lower prices and a wider variety of insurance options to choose from.
so more affordable and more choices. That's a
Yeah.
win-win.
Exactly. And I also think we'll see a continued push for innovation with insurance companies creating new products and services specifically for Super Visa holders.
Like what kind of products and services?
We might see policies that offer more flexibility, like shorter coverage periods for people who are only planning to visit for a few months at a time.
That would be great for folks who don't need a whole year of coverage. It would make the program even more adaptable to different situations.
Exactly. And I think we'll also see a greater emphasis on preventative care and wellness programs.
What do you mean by that?
Insurance companies might start offering benefits that encourage Super Visa holders to stay active, maintain a healthy lifestyle, and, take advantage of preventative health screenings.
That's a fantastic idea. It's about being proactive and staying healthy, which ultimately benefits everyone.
Exactly. It's a win-win for the individuals and for the healthcare system. And finally, I think we'll see more collaboration between insurance companies, government agencies, and community organizations,
What do you envision that collaboration looking like?
working together to provide more comprehensive support and resources for Super Visa holders and their families. Kind of a team effort to make sure families have everything they need.
That sounds really promising. It's
Yeah.
about creating a more welcoming and supportive environment for families who are navigating this whole process.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the value of families and creating a system that truly supports them. Okay, so we've talked about the trends, the predictions, the future possibilities, but as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Great question. I think the key takeaway is the Super Visa program is becoming more accessible and more flexible, making it easier for families to reunite here in Canada. There are definitely challenges, and it can be a complex process, but there are also tons of resources and support systems to help families along the way. This policy change really shows Canada's commitment to family reunification and how much they value the contributions that families make to our society.
I love that. It's important to remember that these aren't just policies and regulations we're talking about. This is about real people, real connections, and the power of family.
So well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredibly insightful and inspiring conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, keep exploring this topic, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going about the importance of family reunification. It's something that touches all of us, and your voices matter.
Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.